Have you ever watched a mother's dignity torn apart, piece by piece? They say the colonies belong to the crown, but in Ash Hollow, 1773, the only thing that belonged to the poor was their pain. British soldiers filled the muddy streets, laughing as they took bread from the mouths of hungry children. And if you dared to speak, they reminded you what loyalty meant. With the butt of a musket, Mary Whitlock knew this humiliation well. A widow, a mother, a patriot's wife. Her husband had died for freedom, and yet freedom never came. The redcoats came instead, taking her wool, her dignity, her peace. Each day she lowered her eyes to survive. Each night she prayed for justice. Have you ever felt that kind of silence, when rage burns louder than words? Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear may shock you. It began with a single act of defiance, and the courage of one quiet widow. Welcome, my fellow patriots. From which city are you watching today? Check if you're already subscribed. Give this video a like. And now, let's begin our story. The rain fell like judgment that morning, turning the streets of Ash Hollow into rivers of mud. Inside the small weaving shop, Mary Whitlock's hands moved fast, trembling over the loom. Each thread she pulled carried a memory. Her husband's laughter, her son's first steps, the promise that sacrifice had meaning. But promises fade when tyranny grows bold. The door burst open. The wind carried in the scent of wet leather and arrogance. Lieutenant Charles Redford stepped inside, his polished boots crushing the floorboards, his eyes glinting with contempt. Behind him, two redcoats smirked, dripping rainwater on Mary's unfinished cloth. "So this is where rebellion hides," Redford sneered, lifting a roll of homespun fabric. "Rags for beggars. Do you sell these to your little patriots, widow?" Mary stood still. The word widow struck harder than any insult. "I sell to those who work hard, sir. Nothing more." His smile twisted into cruelty. "Then you'll sell to the crown today. Payment for your protection." Her heart pounded. "I owe nothing to thieves." The slap came, sharp and merciless. The room filled with the sound of Elias's cry from the back door. Mary staggered, her cheek burning, but her eyes stayed fixed on Redford. He ordered the soldiers to take her cloth, every piece, every thread that kept her alive. They tore through the shop like wolves. Shelves fell, baskets spilled. The loom, her last inheritance from her husband, cracked under a soldier's boot. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Redford laughed, his pale face gleaming with rain and pride. "This is the price of defiance. Remember it, woman. The king protects those who kneel." When they left, the door swung open behind them, clattering in the wind. Mary sank to her knees among the ruined fabric, the colors soaked with rain and shame. Her hands bled from splinters, but she didn't feel the pain, only the hollow ache of disgrace. Outside, the British flags fluttered like a curse. Freedom felt far, unreachable, buried beneath the mud of submission. But something inside her stirred, a quiet flame refusing to die. That night, Elias slept against her arm, clutching a torn piece of red cloth. "Mama," he whispered, "will they come again?" Mary's eyes glimmered in the candlelight. "Only if we let them." The wind moaned through the broken shutters. She stared at the loom's shattered frame, at the small wooden chest beneath the floorboard, the one her husband had left before marching to his death. Inside it lay a hidden truth, a letter sealed with wax, and something heavier wrapped in cloth. Her trembling hands reached for it. Beyond the hills, thunder rolled, distant yet certain. Ash Hollow was quiet, but the storm of rebellion was already moving. The air in Ash Hollow grew colder in the days that followed. The villagers avoided Mary's eyes, afraid that even pity could be punished. Her shop stood silent, half destroyed, the broken loom like a skeleton of what once gave her purpose. Each dawn she swept the floor, each night she prayed, but the echo of Redford's laughter still clung to the walls. Then, one gray morning, the thunder of hooves shattered the silence. The British patrol returned. Their redcoats glistened under the mist, rifles slung across their backs like instruments of judgment. At their head rode Lieutenant Redford, his pale grin sharper than the blade at his belt. He dismounted slowly, savoring her fear. "Widow Whitlock," he said, voice smooth as poison, "it seems your boy has developed quite the appetite for treason." Mary froze. "What are you, saying?" He lifted a small leather pouch, tossing it onto the ground. "Army provisions, stolen from His Majesty's stores, found near your door." Her heart stopped. She knew it was a lie, a cruel performance meant to crush her last breath of dignity. Elias stepped forward, trembling. "I didn't steal anything, sir. I swear." Before he could finish, Redford struck him across the face. The sound echoed through the street. "Liar, like your father. Patriot filth, both of you." Mary ran to her son, shielding him with her arms. "Please, he's just a child." Her voice broke under the weight of despair. "If you need punishment, take it from me. But let him go." Redford's smile widened, eyes gleaming with amusement. "Oh, I intend to teach him a lesson in loyalty." He signaled his men. 2 soldiers seized Elias by the arms, dragging him through the mud as he screamed for his mother. Mary clawed at them, her nails breaking against their uniforms, her voice hoarse with pleading. "He's innocent." "Please." Redford leaned close to her ear, his breath cold. "Innocence is a luxury rebels can't afford." He straightened, his tone now sharp with contempt. "You should have learned when your husband died for nothing." The soldiers mounted their horses, hauling the boy onto one of them. Elias's cries pierced the heavy air. "Mama, please!" Mary fell to her knees as the patrol rode away, leaving deep scars in the mud, tracks that cut through her soul. The neighbors watched from behind shutters, afraid to move, afraid to share her fate. She remained there long after the hoofbeats faded, her hands clutching the dirt, her body shaking not from weakness but from something awakening, something fierce, unyielding. The humiliation had burned away her fear. That night she lit a single candle beside the chest under the floorboards. The wax dripped like blood as she unwrapped the hidden contents: her husband's militia uniform, a rusted musket, and a letter sealed in red wax. The words were faded but clear, for the day when silence becomes betrayal. Tears traced her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of revelation. She understood now. This was no longer survival. It was the beginning of resistance. Outside, the wind carried the faint toll of a bell from the church on the hill, a call not to prayer, but to remembrance. Mary stood, gripping the musket. The widow of Ash Hollow was gone. What remained was something the Crown could no longer control. The journey toward liberty had begun, and it would demand everything: her courage, her faith, her soul. The night swallowed Ash Hollow in silence. Only the distant murmur of soldiers and the crackle of torches broke the darkness. Mary walked alone through the rain, her feet bare, her dress soaked and heavy with mud. Each step sank deeper into despair, yet she kept moving, drawn by the faint glimmer of the British camp ahead. Her body trembled, but her purpose did not. At the gate stood 2 guards, rifles crossed before her. Their eyes glowed with mockery. "State your business, woman," one barked. Mary fell to her knees, the cold earth biting into her skin. "Please, I beg you, my boy Elias Whitlock. You took him. I only asked to see him." The guards exchanged amused glances. One spat near her hand. "Should have taught him loyalty, widow. Maybe then he'd sleep in a bed instead of a cage." She clasped her hands, ignoring the insult. "I'll work for you. Scrub floors, cook, mend your uniforms. Take all I have. Just let me bring him food. Let me see him." The laughter died as footsteps approached. The air thickened. Lieutenant Redford appeared from the shadows, his cloak gleaming with rain, his eyes colder than the steel at his hip. "How touching," he said softly. The Patriot mother kneeling for mercy. Mary lifted her gaze, her voice breaking but steady. "He's just a child, sir. Please, I will do anything." Redford crouched before her, studying her face as if savoring her degradation. "Anything?" His smile widened. "Then rise. You may bring him food. But understand mercy has its price." She nodded without hesitation, though her soul screamed in warning. He gestured to the guards. Let her pass. The camp reeked of sweat, smoke, and rot. Soldiers played cards near the fire, laughing over stolen rum. Mary walked through them like a ghost, clutching a small bundle of bread and stew. The torchlight flickered on her wet hair, turning her shadow into a trembling specter of despair. When she reached the prison tent, the guard untied the flap and stepped aside. Inside, the stench of damp straw and blood filled the air. Her breath caught. Elias was there, chained to a wooden post, his wrists raw and bleeding. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes half open. "Mama?" His voice was barely a whisper. Mary rushed forward, dropping the food to cradle his face. "My boy, my sweet boy." She pressed her forehead to his, I brought you food. You must eat. You must stay strong." He tried to smile, but tears fell instead. They said, "I stole." "Mama, I didn't." "I know," she whispered. "I know, my heart." Behind her, Redford lingered at the entrance, his silhouette outlined by the firelight. Touching reunion, he said, voice dripping with mockery, "Enjoy it. He'll be moved at dawn." Mary turned sharply. "Moved where?" "To answer for his crimes before the garrison in Charleston," he replied. "They'll make an example of him." Her chest tightened. "You can't. He's a child." Redford stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Every rebellion begins with a child taught to defy authority. Best to break the spirit before it spreads." He leaned near her ear. "Remember, Widow Whitlock, this is your doing." When he left, the tent fell silent except for Elias's ragged breaths. Mary held him as if to shield him from the world itself. The chains clinked softly, like cruel lullabies in the dark. Her mind burned with a storm of decisions and revelations. She had begged for mercy and found none. The crown knew no compassion, no honor, no humanity. Only power and the pleasure of humiliation. Outside, thunder rumbled once more over the hills, as if the heavens themselves raged. Mary wiped the blood from her son's wrists with the hem of her dress. "Sleep, my love," she whispered. "Mama will not let them take you." The flame that once flickered in her heart now blazed like a beacon. Something within her had transformed, grief into courage, submission into rebellion. And before the dawn, she would make a decision that would forever alter the fate of Ash Hollow. Right. The flame of freedom lives in me. The night had grown heavy, thick with the stench of rain and despair. The campfires outside flickered like dying stars, and inside the prison tent, time itself seemed frozen between agony and silence. Mary sat beside Elias, her fingers brushing his hair as he slept, his breathing shallow but steady. Each second carved deeper into her heart, the slow torture of helplessness. Then, a faint sound broke the stillness. A weak voice, raspy and trembling, came from the shadows beyond the straw. "You, the woman." Mary turned. There, half hidden beneath a torn blanket, lay another prisoner, older, his face bruised and his uniform soaked with blood. His eyes glimmered with fever and defiance. She crawled closer. "You need water," she whispered, reaching for the bowl beside her. He caught her wrist. "No. Listen." His grip was faint, but his gaze burned with urgency. "My name, Samuel Hayes. Captain Militia." Her breath caught. "A Patriot soldier. They'll kill you if they hear you speak." "They'll kill us all if you don't," he rasped, coughing blood. "Redford, he's no mere butcher. He carries orders, written commands from Charleston. Ambushes, planned attacks. The militias at Harper's Ford, Millstone Ridge, and Pine Creek, they'll be slaughtered within days." Mary's pulse quickened. "How do you know this?" "I saw the papers, sealed with the royal crest, hidden in his tent, beneath a map chest. If they reach the general, the rebellion dies before winter." His voice faded, trembling. "You can stop it, if you have the courage." Her heart pounded with terror and disbelief. "I'm no soldier." He smiled faintly, the shadow of a man who once believed in destiny. "Neither was I, until they burned my farm, until they hanged my brother." His hand shook as it clutched hers. Liberty demands sacrifice, even from those who never sought war. She could feel his strength slipping. "Oh wait, Captain, please. Find them, the documents. Deliver them to William Carter in the Northern Hills." His eyes dimmed. "Tell him Hayes kept his word." Then the light left him. The silence that followed was deeper than grief. Mary stared at his lifeless face, her hand trembling. In that moment, something inside her hardened, a revelation born from the ashes of despair. The humiliation, the loss, the pain, all of it now had purpose. Elias stirred, whispering her name. She turned to him, her tears falling onto his chained hands. "Rest, my love," she murmured. "Mama has work to do." Outside, the soldiers' laughter echoed like a mockery of life. But within Mary, the storm had found direction. She rose slowly, pulling the cloak from her shoulders and draping it over the fallen soldier. Her eyes fixed on the distant glow of Redford's tent. Beyond that canvas lay the secret that could turn defeat into deliverance, and perhaps the price of her own soul. The journey before her was no longer one of survival. It was a passage toward justice, born from pain and guided by something greater than fear, the dignity of a mother, the fury of a patriot. The wind howled through the camp as she stepped into the darkness, her heart pounding with defiance. The widow of Ash Hollow was no longer begging for mercy. She was walking toward destiny. The night pressed down like a coffin lid, thick with mist and the scent of damp earth. The camp had grown still, only the crackle of dying embers and the distant murmur of drunken laughter broke the silence. Mary crouched behind a wagon, her breath shallow, her hands trembling around the knife she had taken from the guard's table. Its blade was dull, but sharp enough for truth. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. Every shadow seemed alive. She could still hear Samuel Hayes's last words haunting her mind. Liberty demands sacrifice. And above that echo, another memory surfaced. Her husband's voice, years ago, as he left for battle. Freedom must be earned, even with pain. Those words had felt heavy then. Tonight, they felt holy. Across the muddy yard, Redford's tent glowed with candlelight. The officers' laughter spilled into the night. Arrogant, careless. The sound of power mocking the weak. Mary's jaw tightened. Behind that canvas lay the documents that could save hundreds of lives, and the man who had destroyed hers. Fear clawed at her chest. One mistake, and she would hang. One breath too loud, and Elias would die, without her ever holding him again. Yet silence was no longer survival. It was betrayal. She rose from the mud, her heart pounding, not with dread but resolve. The time for tears was over. She crept between the sleeping soldiers, moving like a shadow born of sorrow. The smell of gunpowder and ale clung to the air. A sentry nearby stirred in his sleep, and she froze, her body pressed against the cold wood of a wagon. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, silence again. She slipped through the flap of the officer's tent. The air inside was thick with tobacco and arrogance. Redford's cloak hung on a chair, his boots near the cot. He was asleep, sprawled across fine linen, his face peaceful as if cruelty itself had granted him rest. The sight sickened her. She wanted to strike, to end him where he lay. But vengeance would not free her son. Not yet. Her eyes darted to the map chest at the corner. She knelt, lifting the lid with shaking hands. Inside were charts, sealed orders, and letters marked with the crimson wax of the crown. Samuel had spoken true. Beneath the papers lay a folded packet tied in blue ribbon, stamped with the royal crest. She reached for it, her pulse roaring in her ears. The flap of the tent rustled. A soldier's voice outside. Mary froze, clutching the documents against her chest. The candle flickered, shadows dancing across the officer's pale face. For a moment she thought his eyes opened, but he merely stirred and turned away, muttering in his sleep. She slipped out, her heart thundering, her bare feet sinking into the mud. Behind her, the camp remained quiet, unaware that one woman had just changed the fate of their empire. At the edge of the encampment she stopped and looked toward the faint outline of the hills. Somewhere beyond them was William Carter, the man her husband once called brother, the one who could rally the Patriots. The journey ahead would be long and perilous, but for the first time since her husband's death, Mary felt the fire of purpose in her chest, the sacred defiance of a people too long humiliated. She glanced back at the tent, her eyes narrowing. "For every chain you forge," she whispered into the wind, "we will rise stronger." Lightning split the horizon, followed by the low growl of thunder. The rain began again, cold, relentless, cleansing. Mary tightened her grip on the stolen papers, her heart steady now, her soul ablaze. She no longer walked as a widow begging for mercy. She walked as a patriot carrying the weight of liberty itself. The fog hugged the ground like a living thing. Midnight swallowed sound. Mary moved without light, her footsteps soft against wet canvas. Every breath felt like theft. She slipped through the camp, a shadow among sleeping men. Drunken snores broke the silence now and then. A guard spat and turned away. She did not look back. Redford's tent loomed ahead, candlelight trembling inside like a trapped insect. The flap sighed as she eased it open. Tobacco, smoke, and arrogance hit her at once. The officer's cloak still draped a chair. His boots lay by the cot. He had left his vanity where cruelty sleeps. On the desk, maps lay spread like the bones of a country. Sealed papers sat stacked, wax glinting red in the dim. Lines were drawn, names marked in cold ink. Ambush sites, routes for patrols, times, instructions to crush the militias at Harper's Ford. Millstone Ridge, Pine Creek. The plan was neat. The intent was brutal. It read like an executioner's ledger. Her hands trembled but did not falter. She traced a route with her finger and felt the weight of betrayal under the paper. How the crown's men used charts and coin to butcher simple farmers. How generals and merchants conspired while children starved. The humiliation of her people pressed against her ribs. The indignity of being trampled again and again settled into steel. She worked quickly. A spatula of candle wax. A pocket knife to slice the seals. She folded the maps with the care of a mother tucking a child. She slid letters into the center, the orders wrapped tight like a wound. Each fold held a revelation. Hidden truths glowed in ink. Names of informers from town. Times when patrols move. The precise days when patriots would be most vulnerable. Outside, a sentry shifted. Mary held her breath until the world ceased to spin. The tent creaked. A horse stamped. Nothing more. She kept going. She tied the packet in an old scrap of cloth, the same cloth that once wrapped her husband's whistle, and bound it with a strip torn from her skirt. The knot bit into her palm. She felt the weight of every neighbor who had watched through shuttered windows. She felt Elias's small hand in the dark of memory. She felt Samuel Hayes's final plea echoing like a bell. Her lips moved in a soft prayer. "God, forgive what I must do," she whispered. The words were both confession and vow. She had begged for mercy and found only contempt. Now she carried the means to protect others. Now her shame would become a weapon of truth. She paused at the tent's flap and looked once more at the scattered life of Lieutenant Redford, his plans, his arrogance, his ease. The man who flung rags of rebellion into the mud could not imagine a widow walking away with his designs. He could not imagine that a single stolen packet might tilt the balance between ruin and endurance. Mary stepped into the fog. The papers pressed against her chest like a living thing. Her path led away from the camp, toward the hills where William Carter waited, toward the men who would rise not for glory, but for survival. Each step was a sacrifice. Each step a reclaiming of dignity stolen by nobles and officers. Thunder coughed on the horizon. The night closed around her like a cloak. The march she had begun was not yet complete, but the course was set. The widow moved with a silent rage and a steady heart, carrying rebellion folded beneath her breast. The detention area smelled of iron and sweat. Torches guttered along the palisade, throwing the prisoners into a patchwork of light and shadow. Mary moved like a memory quiet, thin as a ribbon of smoke. Each step was a promise, each breath a vow. Elias lay where they had left him, curled against the cold, chains biting into his small wrists. His cheek was pale, a bruise like a dark petal. He slept fitfully, dreams broken by fear. The guards had grown careless in their arrogance. They believed fear would be enough to hold the people down. They were wrong. Mary knelt beside him. Her hands trembled, but they were steady. She lifted the iron ring, sliding the key Samuel Hayes had pressed into her palm. It was rough and warm with the memory of a dying man. The lock turned with a sound like a soft surrender. Elias blinked, then opened his eyes to the ghost of his mother. His lips moved without sound. She laid a finger across them. She breathed. "We move now." He limped to his feet. The chains left red marks that would scar. He clenched his jaw and stood taller than his years. There was a new fire in him, a quiet indignation that had learned the shape of courage. Mary wrapped the stolen documents in oilcloth and slid them into a makeshift canvas bag. She tied the knot with a practiced hand, as if mending seams on the loom. The packet felt heavy with truth. It smelled of wax and ink and betrayal. Names of informers lay inside, maps with ambushes, orders to butcher men who plowed the earth and called it home. The papers were a revelation, proof that the generals and merchants conspired over tables while children went hungry. Proof that the disgrace dealt to simple farmers was not chance, but design. She fixed the bundle to Elias's back beneath his coat, like a pack of secrets pressed close to a child's heart. "If I fall," she whispered, voice iron and honey, "you run. Run until you find William Carter in the northern hills. Give them this. Let the militias see the truth." Her fingers lingered on his shoulder. "Promise me." Elias swallowed. The night had made him old and brave at once. "I promise," he said. The word was small. It held thunder. They moved through the yard and the gaps between sentries, bodies low, steps measured, lamps swung. A dog barked once and then fell silent, either asleep or bought with the soldiers' indifference. The camp showed its cruelty in small habits. The way officers spat at a woman's feet, the way a merchant laughed over stolen grain. The weight of insult hung in every corner. Mary carried that weight and turned it into motion. At the fence she paused. Fog wrapped them, a soft cloak that hid their shapes from the world. She looked back once, to the tents where Redford drank and plotted. The sight stirred a new resolve, transformation from grief to planned revolt. The journey ahead would demand sacrifice beyond what she had known. It would test her decisions like steel in a smith's fire. Elias pressed close. His breath warmed her wrist. "Mama," he whispered. "Will they not if we move?" she answered. "Not if we carry truth where it must go." They slipped into the fields, the tall grass swallowing their footsteps. Behind them the camp lay like a wounded beast, full of arrogance and cruelty that thought itself eternal. Ahead the hills waited, dark ridges that could hide men, that could shield a plan. Each step was deliberate, each heartbeat measured in small, hard beats of rebellion. Mary walked with the dignity of one who had been humiliated and would not be broken. She had been reduced to pleading at a gate. She had been struck, shamed, almost broken. Now she walked as a soldier of a different kind, one who wielded truth instead of sword. The hidden truth at Elias's back might save lives. It might ignite a wider uprising. It might cost them everything. Thunder breathed on the horizon. The sky loosened to fine, steady rain. The night swallowed them. Her silhouette and the boys faded into the dark. The road ahead was dangerous and holy. The choice had been made, the path was set. The forest swallowed the world in darkness. Rain poured through the branches like molten glass, washing blood and dirt into the hungry soil. Mary ran until her lungs burned, the stolen documents pressing against her chest with every desperate step. Behind her, Elias stumbled, clutching the canvas bag that carried the fate of men who still believed in liberty. Thunder rolled, deep and violent, echoing through the valley like cannon fire. They had almost reached the ridge when a shout cut through the storm. There, by the trees, 3 redcoats burst from the shadows, muskets gleaming wet in the flashes of lightning. Their boots sank into the mud as they advanced, their faces twisted with contempt. To them, this was nothing more than sport, a final humiliation for a woman who dared to defy the crown. Mary turned, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes fierce with something beyond fear. "Go, my son," she cried, pushing Elias toward the darkness. "Run and don't look back." The soldiers hesitated only a moment. Then came the crack of 3 muskets at once, 3 bursts of thunder that tore through the rain. The impact threw her to the ground. Her knees struck the mud first, then her hands, and finally her chest. The world dimmed to the sound of the storm. The cold spread quickly, but she felt no pain, only the weight of the earth drawing her down. Elias turned once, saw her collapse, and froze. For a heartbeat he wanted to run to her, too, drag her back from death itself. But the fire in her eyes before she fell returned to him, silent and commanding. "Go." He clutched the bag tight and ran. The forest became a blur of shadows and rain. Behind him the soldiers shouted, loading again, their curses swallowed by thunder. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the mud where Mary lay. Her dress torn, her blood mixing with the soil of the land. She had refused to surrender. Her breath came shallow, lips trembling. She tasted the rain, the iron, the earth. Around her the forest seemed to kneel, the storm bowing low. In that final moment she felt her husband's voice again. Freedom must be earned, even with pain. She had given everything, her dignity, her peace, her life. But her son carried the truth now, the truth she had stolen from tyrants. One word escaped her lips, softer than the rain, brighter than the lightning that burned above. Freedom. The soldiers approached, rifles lowered, uncertain if she still lived. One kicked her shoulder. She did not move. They spat into the mud, their laughter cruel and hollow. "Let her rot," one said. "The boy won't last till dawn." But Elias ran, his small figure disappearing among the trees, the bag bound tight against his back. The storm raged louder, covering his escape, as if the heavens themselves shielded the last air of her courage. Far ahead, the hills waited, dark, endless, alive with unseen promise. Each step he took carried more than grief. It carried transformation. A child's flight had become a rebellion's seed, and in the distance, where lightning struck the ridge, it seemed the earth itself whispered her name, a vow written in thunder and blood. The dawn rose pale and cold, bleeding light across the drenched hills. Elias stumbled through the mist, his small body trembling, his breath ragged. Each step sank into the mud as if the earth itself sought to pull him down. His clothes were soaked, his hands raw, his heart shattered, but the bag on his back remained untouched. He would not let go. It was all that remained of her. When he reached the Patriot camp at the edge of Millstone Ridge, the sentries almost mistook him for a ghost. The boy collapsed before them, his lips blue, his voice barely a whisper. "For the militia," he gasped, clutching the bundle to his chest. "From my mother." The men unwrapped the mud-stained cloth. Inside lay the sealed orders, the maps marked with the red ink of tyranny. A hush fell as the truth unfolded before their eyes. Plans for betrayal, for slaughter, for the complete destruction of their cause. The revelation struck like thunder. William Carter himself rode from the command tent, disbelief shadowing his face as he read the British handwriting. "God above," he murmured, this will save them all." Within hours, riders spread the warning through the valleys. Ambushes were broken. Farmers turned soldiers lived to fight another day. A mother's sacrifice became the shield of a nation not yet born. And through it all, Elias lay fevered by the fire, whispering her name as though it were a prayer. Mary Whitlock, the woman who had stood alone before muskets, and whose death had sparked deliverance. Days later, the British soldiers returned to Ash Hollow. They searched the woods, cursing through the rain, hunting for the body of the widow who had shamed them. But all they found was emptiness, and a single rosary hanging from a branch above the muddy clearing. Its beads gleamed faintly in the morning sun, swinging gently in the wind. Some said the rebels had buried her in secret. Others swore the storm had carried her away. Yet the story spread beyond the village, whispered by travelers and soldiers alike, the mother who died for freedom. In taverns and chapels, her name became a vow. Men spoke it before battle. Women held their children closer when they heard it. The legend of Mary Whitlock crossed rivers and borders, a symbol of defiance carved from grief. Elias never left Ash Hollow. He rebuilt the small shop, the same place where his mother once worked the loom and endured her shame. Every evening, when the sun fell and the fog crept through the valley, he lit a single candle in the window. Its glow flickered against the darkness, steady and unyielding, a promise she had made before her final breath. Neighbors sometimes saw him standing there, staring at the horizon as if waiting for someone to return. And though years passed, the ritual never changed. The candle burned for her, for the farmers and the soldiers, for every soul crushed beneath the weight of a foreign crown. The wind carried whispers of her name through the hollow, soft, mournful, resolute. To some it was sorrow, to others it was prophecy. But to Elias, it was a reminder that liberty was not born in palaces, but in the hearts of those who refused to kneel. Some nights, when thunder rolled far away, he swore he could hear her voice again in the rain, gentle, certain, eternal. And as the candlelight trembled against the window pane, he whispered the same words she had spoken with her final breath. "Freedom, right. The flame of freedom lives in me." The legend of Mary Whitlock lived on long after the war's smoke had cleared. Farmers spoke her name in reverence, soldiers whispered it before battle, and mothers taught their children that liberty was not born in grand halls, but in the courage of those who refused to kneel. She became more than a woman. She became a vow. Her death was not an ending, but the spark that set hearts ablaze from the Carolinas to the far colonies beyond the hills. Elias grew into a man beneath that memory. He carried his mother's story as one carries a blade close to the heart, sharpened by grief. When others faltered, he reminded them of her journey, of how a single act of defiance from a poor widow had turned despair into rebellion. Around him, men who had once bowed now stood tall. The world she left behind was still cruel, still scarred by betrayal and greed, but it was no longer silent. Her sacrifice had broken the chains of humiliation and replaced them with the unbreakable promise of dignity. Years later, when the colonies finally stood as one, the banner of a new nation rose over battlefields soaked in blood and faith. And though her name was not written in the scrolls of generals or kings, her story lived in the pulse of every patriot who dared to fight for independence. Freedom had demanded everything from her peace, her comfort, her life. But through that sacrifice, liberty gained a voice that would never again be silenced. They say on quiet nights in Ash Hollow, when the wind moves through the trees and the church bell echoes faintly across the fields, you can still see a single candle flickering in the window of the old Whitlock house. Its flame never dies, never bends to the storm. It burns for her, for all who have fallen, for every soul that carried the dream of a land unbound. That light is the heartbeat of a people reborn. It is the eternal fire of a mother's love turned into rebellion, her suffering transformed into redemption. It reminds us that liberty is not granted by crowns or armies. It is claimed by the brave, guarded by the willing, and kept alive by those who believe. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the cost of that struggle, let that flame burn in you too. Leave your mark upon her memory. Write in the comments, "The flame of freedom burns in me." And if you wish to, continue walking beside the brave. Here is another story of courage and sacrifice. Click and carry the fire forward with me.